Just want to remind you guys, this episode is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, what is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Want to welcome on special guest from the Blue Stable himself, Landon Oliver. Landon, thanks for coming on, man. Good to have you on. And we just finished up the Chris Ballard press conference here just recently. And I know you had posted something on X that I thought could make an interesting conversation in regards to the Indianapolis Colts and their defense. And just kind of want to talk about today, man. What could this Indianapolis Colts defense look like? Because I know you made a post that, it could be on the horizon that there could be some personnel changes coming, whether that means some players being shipped out, whether that means some new players added in. So how are you doing? How are you feeling after the Chris Ballard presser and everything when it comes to this defense? How are you feeling right now about everything?
Yeah, personally, I'm doing great. It's Friday. And always lovely to join you on here. I know it's been a little bit, but I'm glad we were able to get together, once again to talk some Colts football. As far as the presser goes, it pretty much went about how I expected it to go. Kind of like you alluded to, that tweet I made, and it was actually yesterday that I had made it, just kind of in the comments away from everything. But I thought it was kind of relevant to bring it back out today based on what was said in the presser. I thought it kind of echoed a lot of similar sentiments from stuff that I had heard about conversations taking place and stuff like that. I think it's not only just on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's going to be changes throughout the roster itself. Maybe not necessarily guys being like shipped off or traded, but more along the lines of competition brought in at multiple spots throughout this roster to kind of push some guys. Now, I do expect, there is some free agents out there, undrafted free agents that this team more than likely will not bring back. I know it's kind of been their mantra, we like our guys, we're going to re-sign our own, we're going to take care of our own. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the approach this offseason. So I do expect maybe not a massive turnover, but I do expect there to be some changes. And I think this roster on offense and on defense, more so on defense, I think it could look very different after the draft in May when we're sitting here and free agency's come and gone, the draft is come and gone. I think it could look pretty different.
Yeah. So obviously we're still only in January, so there is still a lot of time till free agency, and heck, the Colts haven't even hired a defensive coordinator yet. But I guess when you're kind of looking at this roster right now where it stands, Landon, and obviously there's a lot of time and a lot of things that will happen between now and free agency. But if you're kind of looking at parts of this roster that, number one, either you believe need more competition, or number two, maybe you think need a potential new starter in it, what would be some of those positions? We'll start with like some competition potentially even. We'll start there and then move into some positions that maybe the Colts need to be looking to add a starter or two to it as well. So let's start with the competition. What would you say right now, looking at this roster, are some places that you're like, the Colts seriously need to consider adding some real competition in there?
Well, I think two spots that jump out whenever you're looking at it like that, and it might surprise some people, but it's going to be quarterback. I think the quarterback competition, and it was alluded to in the press conference, I think it's going to be a real thing. I don't think the days of, we're just handing this guy the reins to the franchise, I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward. I think there's a very high likelihood they bring in somebody, whether through free agency or the draft. Personally, I think it's more than likely going to be through free agency, a guy that can really compete to push Anthony Richardson for that starting quarterback job, really push him in those quarterback meetings, and basically, like I said, just make him earn that role, because the first 2 years, and they were very adamant about it, that this was his team. They were going to hand him the job. He was voted as a team captain 2 years in a row, and it hasn't gone, as they expected. And so I think a lot of fans think they've coddled him, they've babied him, they've kind of held his hand really throughout this first 2 years of this process. And I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward. This is now 2 years in a row that he has dealt with injuries that has kept him out for multiple games through the season. Obviously, we all know about the benching and the preparation and accountability and stuff like that. But even just going for the play on the field as far as passing the ball, it has not been good enough. And the growth has not been enough to move forward saying, this is 100% our guy, our franchise quarterback. So I really do think they're going to look to bring in a quarterback this offseason, whether it's a guy like Justin Fields, maybe a guy like Jameis Winston, maybe they draft a guy. I don't think they go that route because, of course, when you're dealing with rookie quarterbacks, there's a lot of development that has to take place. So I think those type of guys that can really get in and push him to earn that starting role as a starting quarterback on this team, that's going to be a spot that I look toward. Another one is going to be linebacker. I don't think there's going to be this major shakeup where they're trading Zaire Franklin. They're basically blowing up the entire linebacker room. They've got some talent in there. Guys like Alubi, guys like Jalen Carleys, even guys like Zaire Franklin. I think he's earned the right to be back next season after kind of what was an up and down 2024 for him. Even with that, he made he's second team All Pro, made the Pro Bowl, stuff like that. I think a lot of it comes from the distractions off the field, a lot of the venom towards him from this fan base. And I think he has earned the right to put those distractions to bed, have them no longer be a part, and really just solely focus on the film. But I do expect there to be added competition, whether it's in the form of a free agent. And, I've seen Dre Greenlaw thrown out there from fans. I think even I've kind of thrown him out. I think he should be a priority for this team. He's had some injury issues, but when he's on the field, coming off of that Achilles injury that he suffered back in January, whenever he's been on the field, he's one of the best pass coverage linebackers in football, a guy that comes from a winning culture, has played in multiple Super Bowls, won the division multiple times. He knows what it looks like to have success. And you could possibly see maybe a free agent of his caliber and a draft pick in the first few rounds added to that linebacker room. And they're going to bring in competition.
Yeah, so what positions then would you say the Colts need to add? Not necessarily like a guy that 100% will start, but a guy that definitely is competing for a starting spot on this roster. Because, we heard Chris Ballard talking about a few different positions that need to get better. So in your mind, what are some of those positions?
Yeah, well, really, to me, it's kind of easy to think about whenever you think of the guys that have been announced as defensive coordinator candidates that they're interviewing right now. You have guys like a Steve Wilkes, Alou Anarumo. These guys, they have a very, very robust background of being secondary coaches. That's not a position that they've really invested a ton in over the last few years, really outside of the Juju Brents pick. Most of their guys along that are, you got some third rounders, a lot of undrafted free agents, some seventh rounders with Rodney Thomas and Jalen Jones and stuff like that. There hasn't really been a premier investment into that secondary yet. And I think that's really hurt them over the last couple of years at that spot. Obviously Womack and Jones played pretty well, but something that myself and, my guy Colts film room over at the Blue Stable that we've talked about is a lot of times you have to be willing to part with good to find great. And while those are good players, the jury's still out on finding great players at those spots. So I think you're going to see a really heavy push in bringing in some veterans and some rookies in the secondary, whether that's going to I do think it's going to be both spots at safety and at cornerback. I think the days of, relying on Juju Brents and Dallas Flowers and, all those type of guys to, we're going to run it back and we're going to hope these guys take a step forward. I think those days are gone. I think you're going to have to go out, add some real high caliber starting pieces to those spots and trust that the coaches you hired, whether it does end up being a coach with a strong background in secondary, that's going to have to be a priority for them. And I think they're going to try to make that a priority. And Chris Ballard even really, you know, something that he said about the defensive line was that he was happy with the way they played, but you have to be able to get towards the quarterback, whether that's using exotic packages, whether it's being more aggressive. But one of the ways that he really spoke about that was he had mentioned, a lot of times, yes, the sack numbers went down, but it was more along the lines of, you know, the other quarterbacks getting the ball out quickly because they know where the holes are in this zone and the secondary and stuff like that. They're able to get the ball out so quick that it really just kind of negates the investments into this defensive line because there's no pressure on the defensive line to perform when your secondary is constantly, giving up these quick, easy passes. So to me, a lot of people read that as a kind of a defensive line thing, but to me, that really spoke on the secondary about giving these guys on that defensive line all these high investments, and that's really where most of the investments of his tenure have come is along that defensive line. Multiple first rounders, second rounders, trades, big contracts. That's all come along the defensive line, and if you're going to invest in that, it really kind of does yourself a disservice to, I guess, really negate the positive aspects of that when you're allowing these quick, easy passes, these outlets, letting these quarterbacks just be comfortable out there and get the ball out, within 2 seconds. So I think there's going to be some big investments in the secondary at both safety and at corner.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned just the entire roster as well, and Chris Ballard had made a comment. I'll quote him here. Really having a receiving talent that other teams can prepare for. Kind of talking about the middle of the field, and obviously a lot of people were thinking tight end Tyler Warren, one of those tight ends in the draft. What do you see the Colts needing to do? Because that group obviously we've seen the poor stats in their favor, and not in their favor this last year. So when it comes to that unit and just pass catchers in general, supporting Anthony Richardson, coming around him, what do you see the Colts needing to do from that standpoint?
As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. Now, what is PrizePicks? PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball, and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.
Yeah, well, they're going to have to redo this tight end room. And I think this is a good year to do it in, namely because you don't have a lot of guys under contract returning. Kylan Granson's a free agent. Mo Alley Cox is a free agent. Really, the only guys you have under, I think Drew Ogletree is still under contract, and I think Jelani Woods is going into the last year of his rookie year, but you can't really count on him moving forward. That room is another room that I expect to look extremely different, come May. And I think there's a chance they could really double dip and add somebody in free agency and find somebody in the draft early on. This is a very, very deep tight end class in this draft class, and a lot of really talented guys. Obviously, you mentioned Tyler Warren, who might have played himself into that, top 10, top 12 pick in this class. But you also have guys like Colston Loveland. You've got guys like Harold Fannin Jr. Gunnar Helm is a name in the mid rounds that could make some waves. There's also, tight end out of LSU that's really done some good stuff there. So this is going to be a deep tight end class. One of the aspects that I look at, especially when I look at roster building, is really an approach that the Green Bay Packers take. And that's if they have a significant weakness at a spot, they tend to double dip in the draft and in free agency. They really try to remake that room. And I think that could be a very wise approach for them this offseason at that tight end spot. And something that he mentioned in this that I think a lot of people really kind of overlooked is when talking about the pass catchers on this team was kind of, I'm not going to say a shot, but it was definitely a kind of additive for the quarterback position, because he had, routinely mentioned that, sometimes Anthony Richardson, whenever he's going through his process, he's a little bit late to get there and he's just firing that ball out at 100 miles an hour and just constantly throwing fastballs in there. Those balls are hard to catch, and that leads to a lot of drops. And I think that's why you see a significant difference in the drop percentage whenever Joe Flacco was playing and Anthony Richardson was playing. It's not necessarily always on the pass catchers. Sometimes it's on those quarterbacks to deliver a catchable ball, and you don't always need to, rocket that thing in there at 100 miles an hour whenever the guy's 5-6 yards away. So I think that could also play a big role if the development takes place like they're hoping this offseason with Richardson. That could help the pass catchers as well. They don't have that, elite 1A wide receiver out there like a A.J. Brown or a, C.D. Lamb or Justin Jefferson or those type of guys. But I do think in a whole, this wide receiver group is very talented, and they're good enough to get the job done to win football games. But I do think with Shane Steichen's system, this was a place that I really was surprised they didn't invest in. It was just kind of more of the same, where they were running it back and hoping guys made a jump with Kylan Granson, Jelani Woods, Ogletree. That jump never really occurred. But one of the staples of his offense in Philadelphia, obviously, when you have a guy like Dallas Goedert, was these quick tight end screens, these short passes over the middle of the field to get Jalen Hurts comfortable. And Dallas Goedert made a huge impact on that offensive system and that roster. Shane Steichen has not had that type of player at that position since he's been here in Indianapolis. So I think there's a number of spots that this roster will look to add competition and will look very, very different after this draft. And tight end is probably at the top of that list for me, along with the secondary.
Yeah, and obviously it'll depend in large part for that defensive coordinator, whoever that is. They have a couple guys they brought in, but I will be interested to see, if it is, say a Steve Wilkes, does he bring in a Dre Greenlaw or somebody he's familiar with, guys that are in his system and things like that. So yeah, I'm really intrigued to see that.
Yeah, it's really hard right now because, like you said, we're in January, right? This is the beginning of January. We're only 11 days into the year. Without knowing who the defensive coordinator is and the staff that he's going to bring in, obviously Charlie Partridge is still there, but they let go of the linebacker and the DB coach. Today that was announced today that those guys will not be returning, along with Gus Bradley. That could signal a big, push towards who they are targeting, whether it be in the draft or free agency. That'll kind of give you an enlightened look of what things could look like. But as of right now, with those positions vacant and we don't know who they're hiring at the moment, it is kind of hard to project the exact players they would target because they're not there. But I feel very comfortable in saying that I think those positions, regardless of who the defensive coordinator is, I think those positions will be a priority this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And they definitely have been some weaknesses for the team this past year. So we'll have to see, man, what happens when it comes to that, when they finally do hire that new defensive coordinator. Well, Landon, I appreciate you coming on, man. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, your work, and everything you do over there at Blue Stable?
Yeah, well, you can always find me on Twitter. I know a lot of you, if you're listening to this, you probably already follow me. If you don't, I would appreciate it. It's at Landon3MR there on X. But you can also find me on the Blue Stable. We do live shows 2 times a week, usually on Tuesdays and Fridays. Myself and Culture Shock and Colts Film Room, we always put out a lot of content. So you can follow us there. We're on Twitch, we're on YouTube, we're on X, we're on Spotify, Amazon, pretty much anywhere you can get media at. You can find us there.
Awesome. Well, guys, be sure to go check out all they do over there. Landon, do appreciate you, man. It'll be interesting to see these next couple months, man, what does happen. And do the Colts do change their free agency approach a little bit and definitely infuse some talent into this roster right now. But appreciate you, man. We'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on.